Twitless, what are we talking about today?
We are talking Superman. I am super stoked to talk about this. We're talking, obviously, the Superman film, and we're pairing that with a very interesting combination of essentially the beginning and end of Superman's first major era, which starts in 1938 with Action Comics #1 and ends with Action Comics 583 with the Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow storyline. That'll be part 2 of this review. Part 1, we'll be talking about the film and Action Comics #1. So a lot of interesting synergy to talk about there. Obviously, we've got the beginning of a new film era with James Gunn at the helm, kind of trying to re-energize the flailing and failing Snyderverse, unfortunately. My condolences to the Snyder Bros. But in addition to that, there's been a lot of speculation that this film was also going to be a barometer for not just the DC universe, but superhero films as a genre. There's been a lot of predictions, a lot of talk about superhero fatigue, and the jury is still out on whether or not this film is going to be a turn in the superhero genre as a whole. So there's a lot riding on this, and there's a lot of interesting things to talk about.
Yeah. So starting off with my take, to surprise nobody, I'm going to talk about a little bit of history, some ancient history about superhero films. James Gunn, this is the second time he's revived a franchise or attempted to. I had to be reminded by this by some friends, but back after like Iron Man 2 and 3, superheroes, there was fatigue, and there were terrible films that were out. People were tired of it, and we were probably not going to get the Avengers Endgame kind of scenario that most people know and love without Guardians of the Galaxy kind of putting new like a zany sort of ragtag cast of characters with all kinds of techno magical insanity, like high fructose humor plus extended action shots, all that kind of jazz that James Gunn is very good at. Until he was able to reinfuse that into Marvel, we almost didn't get the success of the MCU to the extent that we know it now, and it's challenging. I think a lot of people's senses of the DC cinematic universe is that it has to strike a different tone because the comics generally do. And the calculus, it seems right now, is that the best way to save the DC cinematic universe is to do it the same way they did Marvel. And it just might, even though I rarely like James Gunn films, honestly, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, but they're usually, it's just the same note, all his films. Unless they're like weird kind of campy, like cynical, like horror film kind of takes, or they're this kind of thing, or the Guardians of the Galaxy / Superman movies. He has a lot of enduring appeal with a lot of people who like superhero stuff. Like everybody loves all 3 of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies who are into this genre. So if there is a way to save Superman, if there is a way to answer that question, whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, it probably is going to be answered by James Gunn. I don't know if there's anyone in the market right now in the director's seat, at least, who can give it a shot, that has a really clear vision for this kind of genre, who has a lot of energy and has at this point over 15 years like logged in the genre. It's probably going to be James Gunn, and it's already paid for itself after this weekend. It's already done over 200 million, which is what it costs to produce this. That's kind of my take. I don't think I liked it, but I think it's going to save DC, and I think it's saving Superman.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting take. It's a movie that a reasonable person shouldn't like, because there's so many inconsistencies and illogical aspects to it. But tonally, it does present something completely new and different for the DC universe, and it's probably exactly what it needs. The only issue I have is not who's going to save Superman, is who's going to save James Gunn from playing out and wearing his welcome out the way Josh Whedon did, because that's all I'm seeing is James Gunn doing the best representation and mimicking Josh Whedon's approach and style until it's just become an old hat, and there's just nothing fresh there or nothing new. And I just felt like I was immersed again in another James Gunn verse. This is not different from Suicide Squad. This is not different from the Guardians of the Galaxy's movies in a lot of ways. Tonally, humor, he tries to inject a lot of his Whedonisms, you would say, but these are Gunnisms now that we're cycling through. But the problem is that he's lost a lot of the grounding and the heart that he had in those previous works. And I just think he didn't know how to deal with a legacy character like Superman. So while the dressings are very interesting, he does bring in a lot of elements of Superman that's not generally explored in film. He doesn't want the character to be taken so seriously, and a representation of this godlike figure that's usually he's presented as in the cinematic representations. He introduces a lot of the sci-fi elements, a lot of the quirkiness, the zaniness. I was waiting for Mr. Mxyzptlk to jump in here. This is exactly in that style of Superman storytelling. He lost the core element of what motivates this character, what actually makes a story compelling, quite frankly. There's just nothing driving this character's
You don't think
motivations.
360 action shots are what make a
It's a video game.
compelling?
I was watching a video game. Aesthetically, it looked great. It was a great visceral experience, but it's so shallow, and
Okay,
the
you're killing me.
emotional beats were just devoid of context.
All right, I can't. I've held back. What we watched different films, and that's okay.
I knew you were going to do this.
This was a movie. This was a movie for Superman fans and comic book fans of the superhero type who love serialized superhero storytelling. And I actually read some of the discourse actually kind of play this out for good or bad. That someone said, I felt like I got dropped into season 3 of a show. And I just started in the past year or so, I actually started recollecting a pull list for Superman and Action Comics. So I actually kind of jump into what the current storyline for Superman was and sort of like find your new grounding, like most people do. When you jump into a run, unless you're very lucky enough to jump on an issue 1 or a reboot, a lot of us have to jump into superhero comics and say, okay, I'm starting now and I'm going to have to catch up at some point. And this felt like a lived-in superhero universe where you were a few issues behind and you're going to have to catch up, which is the experience of a lot of people have to jump into as superhero comic book enjoyers. And so I actually, it's a comic book film that actually plays more like a comic book. I understand that it would play like a video game. I think that's actually, that parlance it fits in a way. But kind of like when we talked about with Secret Level with the Amazon Prime series, where it was like, this is a show that's not playing by film rules. It's playing by video game rules, and you have to be a video game fan to really jump into it. But that means it doesn't have to play by the same sort of rules and expectations we have for film. This one played a little more to the comic book side of things. That's burying the lead here. I'm just going to say I kind of enjoyed this film. Not kind of. I loved it. And it's the first film I've seen in years. It's the first film I've seen in years I want to see a second time. I thought I was too old and crusty and cynical. I thought I had evolved past the point I would want to see a movie a second time. I walked out of that movie. I've had a dumb smile on my face for 2 days. Every time I think about the movie, I like it more, and I can't wait to see it again. Part of this is because I have read Golden Age Superman, Silver Age Superman, Bronze Age Superman, Modern Superman, Current Day Superman. I'm a Superman person. If you're a Superman person through the ages of Superman, you're going to like this film. That being said, I don't worship this film. This film is chock full of jagged and rough edges. The best thing I can describe is that the emotional core is very strong. It is a American tale of a boy and his dog. It is the story of a boy and his dog from rural America deciding to be American above all else and triumph against all odds and just save lives, which goes to the core of Golden Age and Silver Age Superman. Some of it is almost ripped straight from comics, Action Comics number 1 and 2, to actually pull in the comic. The first story of Superman, the end of Action Comics number 1, he's intervening with a corrupt senator and a lobbyist who's trying to stir up a war between two countries. And Superman jumps in and says, "No, we're gonna stop this. I'm gonna jump in and save lives." This is the Superman who, from the Golden Age, declared war on traffic accidents and basically cleaned up the city and made sure no one was gonna die from traffic accidents. The person who, very naively and using American brawn and power, would just step into problems and solve them because I don't want to see people die, which is exactly the line that gets kind of drilled into us through David Cornsweet, whatever you want to. I don't know how you pronounce his last name. So you can just see so much Superman in this character if you love the character, and if you love your inner child, the inner child that just loves superheroes, I think is just going to find a lot to love in this film. That being said, I understand why there are people who don't like this movie. And I think, like I said, I think it breaks some filmic rules. And I think that I think it very much is a comic book movie for comic book storytelling. It feels like a comic book, and that's what I think one of the reasons I liked it so much. But people who are walking into a film to expect very film things, if you do the cinema sins, I feel like that's the way to very quickly check out of this movie. I think people who walk in and they go problem, you're very quickly going to run out of your tally because it has a lot of jagged edges, tons of them. But like I said, that emotional resonant core just carried me through. I was I was hope maxing the whole film. Only one thing broke my high the entire film. But
are you thinking, Twitless? Sorry, I kind of want to drill into something that you're
into that discombobulated soup of appraisal and takes.
Well, like, I mean, far be it from me, like,
right.
If you enjoy something, I mean, it'd be sad for us to tell you you're wrong for liking it. But,
he's so wrong. He has no right to like this.
What is it that was it
okay? I've read more.
Was it the tone that was off that you feel like is technically off, or is it like this is how you tell a story, like structurally would be technically off for this film? Like, what was it that you identified as things you wouldn't normally do with a film adaptation that James Gunn didn't do, but you were fine with?
So right now we're dealing with some very interesting things with storytelling. I actually also think there's something else that's going on regarding the myths of America that's also, I think, very important to dig into. It's another reason I think people are having issues with this movie. And we get to that in a bit. But when it comes to the structural side of things, I think that there are expectations people have of films regarding when you set up a new universe, when you do a reboot, or when you're introducing a property. And when it comes to both video games and comics, there's been a struggle for years because a lot of superhero storytelling tends to follow the action film formula. There's, in fact, some superhero films there's almost interchangeable from James Bond movies. You just basically have a superhero playing the role of James Bond, or playing a hard-boiled detective or something like that. And what's interesting about this is the fact that comics don't follow those rules. See, at the end of an action film, you're supposed to kill your villain. There's even a typical setup for that, which is like, you extend some mercy to the villain and then he backstabs you and then you now have the ability to kill him. Superheroes don't kill their villains that often. They haven't for decades. They do the fake sort of, he might have died and then he comes back the next 2 or 3 episodes. And everyone who reads comics knows this and has been okay with it for a century. And they're also okay with the editor jumping in every 8 seconds and saying, buy this other issue if you wanted to hear this other part about a story. And comic book readers are used to getting stories piecemeal. We were used to having Stan Lee tell us, oh, hey, Iron Man, the reason why Iron Man's in Los Angeles right now is you didn't read this issue of Iron Man. And so if you want to catch up with what we're seeing in Avengers right now, you actually have to read 2 other comics. And some comic book readers would complain about this. I'm not saying this is all perfect storytelling. That's why I said these are jagged edges, but it's also like the most comic book thing ever. So some of the things
you make
like,
comic books sound like the absolute worst medium on the planet Earth, that you have to enjoy them by inferring the storyline that is implied in the story as you're reading them, because they're not obligated to tell you a complete story. That's totally,
this is
superhero. They're allowed to lore dump for the
exactly. This is a total whitewash.
No,
exactly
it's not.
What's
this
happening
is super,
with the movie.
The
movie was a spattering of all these honest. There was a spattering of all these unestablished elements and moments and character beats. There was nothing motivating anything. There was nothing setting up to anything.
There were definitely motivations. There were motivations.
No, there were not motivations. They were totally not motivations.
Yes, there were.
They jumped right into the middle of a story. He's in the snow all of a sudden after getting beaten up. You have no idea exactly what happened. Suddenly he's fighting Luthor. Luthor wants to have a war between 2 countries. Luthor's super jealous of Superman because he's an alien. And they're just like throwing all of these motivations at the wall. Then Superman all of a sudden has an inferiority complex about being human. And then he has an insecurity about his parents. There's nothing continuous there. And he's in a bad relationship that acts like, he's been married to Lois for a million years.
He's dating a Gilmore Girl.
It's the most sporadic, spurgy, get on a soapbox, like internet YouTube show I ever saw in my life. And it's just got a lot of flashy aesthetics to it. And you're like, oh, it's like a comic book. Well, it's not exactly like a comic book, because every comic book that I've ever read had a very strong narrative and a very strong character arc and established things and had payoff.
Then you're not reading enough comics then.
It's just because they say, oh, go read issue so-and-so from in this other run to find out what exactly happened with the crypto and the time that he got fed and stuff like that. That's not a good analogy for the reason why this movie was just piecemeal together.
It wasn't okay. First off, I was saying that in the sense that I wasn't saying that there's plenty to go off of in this movie. I'm just saying that the edges that were rough, it was like, oh, hey, this feels very comic booky. And so I was fine with that. Actually, there's a very direct through line. There are direct motivations. And you
don't have to make a film because it's like a comic book. Like, he's making a film.
That is not what
Can he make a film? Can he make a film, please? I'd like to watch a film. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so my pitch for this comic book type storytelling is the fact that we don't need origin stories all the time. We've done that, and it's established now what the rules, tropes, and shared mythological experiences we have. We know enough about certain mythological figures. We know that Hercules and his origin, we know he's connected to Zeus. You don't need to retell me that every single time. We call them allusions in literature, which is basically shared cultural things. And you can just kind of footnote them and people already know it. In Lord of the Rings, they basically established that swords could glow when you were around orcs, and later in Aragon, they basically just played off of that. The trope had been established. Superhero comics in film have been around for over 20 years at this point, I think, and just in the modern version. And so we don't need as much established because certain things about these characters and how superheroes work. And so if you had done a lot of that background world building, it would have bogged the film down, and people who in the audience who think these films are all connected anyway, you sit next to someone, they think this film's connected to the Man of Steel. They'd be like, I already know this. I don't need this to be retold to me. So now we could argue about whether or not James Gunn maybe does too much or too little of this, but James Gunn was relying on the fact that the audience didn't need to be handheld on these things, and you already knew Superman's going to save the day. He's going to swoop in if there's a giant monster downtown. He only needs to skeleton these pieces, and you kind of fill in some of those blanks yourself. Like I said, there's some jagged edges there. There's probably stuff he could have done better, but I think he did enough to get to the heart of the film.
So Twitless, so I'm going to selfishly ask you to engage with what I said. What do you think about this idea? Let's say you're right. Let's say that your take is actually the most sensible, that you really don't have to. You can go in media res with these stories. That's all fine, but there is a James Gunn slash, like he is kind of like the new Zack Snyder sort of approach to storytelling. Do you think that's what DC needs and Superman needs to save that particular cinematic universe?
So this is where we get into the other thing I wanted to touch on, which is the American myth making. One of the issues with this film is the fact that Superman is a mirror. He is a projection of American power, and I'm not just making that, pulling that out of my butt. We call America a superpower, the world's leading superpower, and the most powerful, most important superhero, the mold of them all, is Superman. People see America as Superman. When we intervene in other nations across the world, people are like, "Who are you, Superman?" Like it's accepted parlance. This was never going to be the Donner era 1977 film, because we're not 1977 America. This is 2025 America. America has been beaten up in national politics, and the country looks at itself as beaten up. So the fact that we have a film with rough edges that's been beaten up around a bit, I think it fits. And the fact that we're still trying to create a hopeful myth out of these pieces, out of these rough spots. This is, I think, the version of Superman that we deserve. And if we don't like it, like I said, it's the mirror, which is, if you don't like what you see in the mirror, you don't blame the mirror. This is what we have in culture. This is what we have in our nation. This is the reflection that we have. And I think there are some people who are still going to see some hope in there and get some positivity and, ride on that high. I think there's a lot of people who are going to look at that and not like what they see, or like parts of what they see. And I can't blame them.
So the unusual thing for me was how far this character has come. After reading Action Comics issue 1, it's a completely different universe. Back then, we could say America existed in an alternate universe when Superman was originally introduced into the lexicon. And this was a character who was first of its kind, a superhero meta type being, but brought in through the detective storytelling genre that most comics were fodder for at the time. And a lot of his adventures and a lot of his motivations were simply to just solve ordinary crimes and stop ordinary criminals. And the entire mythos of Superman was simply that he was just an alien being. He had insect-like powers, oddly enough, was the way that the original authors described it. He did not fly. He leapt from destination to destination, and he could lift heavy objects like an ant would. But nothing related to a sun that would power him and fuel him in this planet to be a god among us. He was simply a representation of the species from which he originated, an alien to this world. So now we do have this new dynamic where America is not the America that it was of old. And it's not sufficient to just have an exceptional man, an alien man, come in and address the ordinary challenges that we face with criminals in our society and politics, which was another interesting aspect that Superman addressed in Action Comics 1. So all of the seedy underbellies that the ordinary everyday world knew, Superman was there to be the person to shine the light of justice. And nowadays we have something quite more convoluted and complex that needs to be addressed in our society.
That's one of the reasons why I loved the scene. And some people, I think, didn't like this scene, but I really liked the scene where Clark is interviewing with Lois, and Lois is bringing up all the complicated geopolitics of Superman intervening in that war between those two nations. And that's stuff we see in more modern there's some modern Superman stories that deliberately do that. Superman intervenes and they say, "You don't understand the geopolitics here." And Superman says, "You're right. I need to learn more about this." And in Action Comics #1, which is what Clark in the film basically says, is people were going to die. I can't watch that happen. I have to do something. And it's naive. It is delightfully inner child naive, and it's exactly what superheroes were born from, that ethos. And it was criminals are bad, and it goes back to this is not something that's very commonly known, but Siegel and Schuster, the artist and writer combo, or writer and artist combo, the writer Jerry Siegel, his father died tragically during a robbery of his store. And for a long time, Jerry thought that this criminal had essentially murdered his father. Turns out that his father died of a heart attack while the shoplifting or robbery happened. At least that's the official investigation. But Siegel was motivated deeply by this. The fact that there was just street crime. There were problems in our nation, like mobsters, corruption. And honestly, if you take some of those elements, our country, I think, still has those problems, but they had a very 1938 flavor to them. And so Superman was born out of this ethos of, I think, trying to stop these crimes that killed people, and also out of his desire to get a girlfriend. And there you have Superman and Lois, Clark Kent and Superman, and that there was dual identity dynamic, and we get to see the James Gunn spin on that, which I think is a mixture of some of the classic things going all the way back to Action Comics 1, and a mixture of some very modern things like Superman getting upset that Lex Luthor has hired a monkey farm, a literal monkey farm, to call Superman shit on Twitter.
Do you think it strikes me that Spider-Man has kind of taken the place that Action Comics 1 Superman invented? Is that like, I don't know, there's something more cosmic about Superman that even when we re-envision him again for the big screen, like we really have to stay in that cosmic space. He really can't be a grounded kind of cleaning up the streets and dealing with politicians kind of character, right? Like, that's kind of funny. I think we've decided that Spider-Man has to be that guy so that Superman can be this other guy that's a little bigger, maybe, saving the planet rather than just saving the city.
This film was definitely trying to do more of the save the city. It was attempting to, and I definitely invite you guys to push back on this. The attempt was for Superman to be the town hero, because when he's faced at the very end with going and saving the foreign country invasion or having to save his city, he sends the Justice Gang, Guy Gardner, Metamorpho, and Hawkgirl. He sends them to go take care of that while he saves the city. And there's an attempt to make him very tied to his rural roots. They actually divorced him from the Krypton roots. That was a very risky move that Gunn made by making, spoiler alert, the Jor-El and his was it Lara? I always forget her mother's name. The L's, making them far less sympathetic than they've been. Kind of like the Batman with Thomas Wayne and him having feet of clay. But this film was attempting to really make him much more of a town hero, much more of a American, really, because he chooses his American home rather than his alien one, which is odd considering some of what James Gunn and his brother said before this film released.
Final thoughts.
Yeah, I think that putting him in order to resell Superman after the films that we've gotten over the last 10 years, I think this approach of making him a lot more of an everyman than he's been depicted previously, and honestly kind of surrounding him by zanier, in a way more interesting characters, is probably the vehicle by which you're going to make Superman interesting again, which is going to allow you to have a better sequel. I think that's going to have a little more depth and meat on the bones, and you probably need to get millennial women in there too. So you're going to have the like Marvelous Miss Maisel kind of I can't stop talking like kind of Zack Snyder approach, which people seem to love. Selling that angle too. There's just a lot that was put into this, but I can tell it was done with intentionality. I can tell it was done this was not slapped together. Uh, there was $225 million spent on this film, and I could see it all. And it looks like a lot of people did show up to watch all that too, because it's like we said, it's already paid for itself. This is probably what the DC cinematic universe needs. I just hope I like the sequel.
Twitless, final thoughts.
So I definitely think we need to hear from everyone on this panel, just in terms of a last sort of like recommend to see or not. Just even if it's a thumbs up, thumbs down. I think it's pretty clear where I stand on this, which is I enjoyed it a lot. I was riding on a hope maxing, kumbaya-ing buzz throughout this entire film. Superman. One thing I'll say, Matt, I think you'll appreciate this. Superman was Captain Kumbaya the whole film. He was trying to kumbaya everyone, including Lex at the last minute. So just there are a lot of things to critique about this movie, and I recognize them. Superman's more emotional than he's been in previous films. That's not going to jive with certain people. There are, like I said, the film does assume, it throws you in. It doesn't explain as much. It just says, hey, these are comic book characters, and you just fill in some of the details yourself. I'm not going to explain how Mr. Terrific's powers work exactly. You just have to kind of go off of the visual cues. There's a lot of things done there that I think are rough edges, like I said, jagged edges, things that you could critique and find fault with. And I acknowledge all of it. But like I said, I just was grinning like an idiot the entire film. And I've been grinning for 2 days afterwards. So something about this film is working on an emotional level, if not anything else. I recommend seeing it. I'm going to see it a second time. But I do put the caveat here. This film is, I think, not for people who are going to have those senses violated of like I said, the cinema sins. If you keep a tally of I didn't like that, or this thing doesn't quite add up, or this thing doesn't quite add up. If you're a super into continuity, I don't think there's anything that breaks it too bad. That ruins the film. But there's plenty of things to find fault with, whether it's the quantum mechanics of how the pocket dimension work or the superpowers, but it's a thumbs up for me with that caveat. Like I said, there are some people who have said it's definitely not for, but if you like Superman, and like I said, you tend to not, if you like Superman as a character, like really like Superman, you already have a suspension of disbelief that's large enough to swallow what this film is doing.
Well, so I'll give my take as well, I guess, this time. So I think James Gunn was just crushed by the weight of the ask that was given to him here. He had to deal with a legacy character. There's a lot of baggage with Superman, a lot of preconceived notions, and he didn't know how to establish that character from the ground level. So he just thought, okay, I'll throw him into a situation mid storyline. But then he also had to introduce an entire new universe. He had to create a new tonal shift. And he's known for telling very simple stories with a lot of very simple charm. He tells simple love stories. He tells the story of an orphan who's looking for his parents, of lab animals who were experimented on and are just afraid. There's a lot of very core elements in James Gunn's storytelling. And this idea that he can bring all of these together into some kind of big ensemble cast film, also handling a character like Superman, which has been through many different iterations, many different representations, and somehow satisfying all of the audience's preconceived notions for that character with this one film. I think that he just wasn't able to live up to the task. So he threw a lot of elements at the screen. He was trying to see what would stick, and he was just kind of Hail Marying it throughout the entire movie and hoping that something would resonate with the audience. But it was just so all over the place, narrative-wise and emotionally. And Superman never really had a character arc throughout the entire film. He didn't really have a good establishing motivation. He was just idolized at one point and then lambasted at the other. and the entire character, the entire tonal change of the storyline had shifted on a 180 pivot, and it didn't make any sense. It was really hard to deliver, I think, on what James originally intended this storyline to be. It's possible that some of the edits also hurt. He was told initially from the first release that they showed test screening audience there was way too much humor, and maybe humor is his safe space. Maybe that's the reason why this movie had so much humor, is because when he doesn't know what else to fall back on, he just falls back onto as many jokes as possible. And that was clearly present in this one. It was even more so in the original version, and I just think he never really gave much consideration to how to deliver on the heart of the film.
Thank you very much for checking out the video. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more.